The Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I would just like to, there's been an incident in the Middle East last night where 4 Americans lost their lives in attacks on U.S. soil, U.S. embassies. If we could, we'd just take a moment of silence and pray for not only those that were murdered, but also for their families. Thank you. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Examining NASA's Development of the Space Launch System and Orion Crew Capsule. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I'd like to welcome everyone to our hearing, and I especially want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I know many people put in a lot of effort preparing for these hearings, and we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules to appear before this subcommittee. I also want to assure you that we greatly value your expertise and wisdom, and that your testimony will benefit this committee in the weeks and months ahead as we endeavor to ensure uninterrupted development of these important new programs. The purpose of today's hearing is to discuss NASA's and industry's progress, next steps, and challenges developing our nation's next generation heavy lift launcher and crew capsule. For the next several decades, the Space Launch System and Orion multi-purpose crew vehicle will give our country the capability to launch exciting new human spaceflight exploration missions and robotic science missions. No other country has the technical expertise or industrial base to produce anything similar to SLS or Orion, making it all the more compelling to ensure that these programs continue without interruption. It's also important to realize other significant benefits that flow from SLS and Orion programs. First, by building a heavy lift vehicle will enable bold new science missions, and I look forward to Dr. Mountain's testimony about the scale of potential flagship missions that might be conceived for launching 10 or 15 years from now. I am optimistic that once our government's fiscal health has been restored, NASA will have the resources to once again consider robotic flagship missions that will maintain the momentum we currently enjoy with missions such as MSL. Second, looking at the health and vitality of our aerospace industrial base, SLS and Orion will continue to challenge our best and brightest engineers to design and develop advanced propulsion, avionics, and manufacturing capabilities that will maintain America's preeminence in space. While no other country currently has the capability to match what we can do with SLS and Orion, a number of emerging space powers may, in time, be tempted to challenge our leadership in space. That includes space-based technologies that are fundamental to our economy, our quality of life, and our national security. By scaling back investments in aerospace R&D, we risk putting future generations of Americans at risk. Finally, I worry that without SLS and Orion, NASA's and our country's ability to do the hard stuff, cutting-edge space exploration, would be seriously impaired. NASA's first 50 years plus of programs and missions have been awe-inspiring. I want to keep that spirit alive for decades to come. I'd now like to yield my remaining time to the chairman of the full committee, Representative Ralph Hall, for any comments he'd like to make.
Mr. Chairman, of course, thank you for holding this morning's hearing, and thank the 4 gentlemen there for the time they gave in preparation, travel, and for giving us this information that you give us. The Space Launch System, as the chairman said, and Orion crew vehicle are going to enable NASA's future human deep space exploration, and it's vitally important that they be continued, I think, and I think most of us think that, and that Congress and the administration work together to keep these programs on track and on schedule. But having said that, I continue to worry about NASA's commitment to the Space Launch System and Orion. The agency delayed design selection of SLS for 11 months following the enactment of the 2010 Authorization Act. Its budget request for these 2 programs falls significantly short of amounts authorized. I have yet to see evidence that design and development of Orion service module, which would be required to support any multi-day mission, has begun. No mission destination has been selected other than an asteroid to be named later. And while I acknowledge the administration argues we've already been to the moon, I find it questionable that a trip beyond low Earth orbit does not include the moon as an interim destination, maybe or maybe not, but to be considered, to keep in view that we're considering it, to research and development systems that will be required for missions to other planets such as Mars. I have sense enough to know that we're not going to Mars or an asteroid or anywhere else until people can go to the grocery store, and by that I know that the economy's got to get a lot better, but we have to be ready for it and have to continue to be preparing and seeking it. Once the International Space Station is retired, we'll have no manned presence in space except for missions launched on SLS and Orion. Without this new launch system, the technological capability, inspiration, and innovation that springs from our human space flight programs is going to wither. None of us can afford to allow that to happen. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again to our witnesses for appearing before us today. I now recognize Mr. Clarke for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be ranking member of the subcommittee on this very important issue. We want to make sure that the plans, status, and development of these two important projects are on time. And as we're well aware that our Authorization Act in 2010 directed NASA to develop both support human exploration beyond low Earth orbit, provide backup capability to deliver crew and cargo to our International Space Station, and to preserve the critical capabilities of our aerospace workforce and industrial base. And we're all aware that the task of getting SLS's and Orion's architecture underway wasn't an easy one. Back in March of last year, this subcommittee pressed members of NASA for a final decision on the configuration of the next heavy lift vehicle for returning Americans to human exploration beyond low Earth orbit, which is our ultimate goal, at least on the interim basis, by 2021. A year ago this month, we got the decision that the integrated SLS and Orion crew capsule architecture that NASA is currently developing, we got a decision on that. This system builds on the successful and proven space shuttle technologies as well as new developments begun under the former Constellation program before it was ended. While NASA's decision took some time, I'm encouraged that in just a year since announcing the final architecture, NASA and its industry contractors have made considerable progress, and that's something I'd like to talk to you about today as well. The Orion capsule has been delivered. The Orion capsule has been delivered to the Kennedy Space Center in preparation for an uncrewed test flight in 2014. The SLS has completed its initial stages of review, which confirmed the vehicle concept, the overall architecture, and the design and integration approach. Now, in addition to the 2014 test flight of Orion, NASA's plans include an integrated SLS and Orion uncrewed test flight in 2017 and the first crewed test flight by 2021. So it's my hope today that you as witnesses can help us understand how these test flights will help identify risks early on to human flight, any challenges that they face in meeting those milestones, and what's needed to ensure the earliest possible date for returning Americans to deep space exploration. Now, you know, my next remarks have some great references to an outstanding American, Neil Armstrong, who came to this committee a year ago next week. But as someone that is a baby boomer that was a kid during the 60s, I remember as a kid President Johnson standing before President Kennedy, as well as standing before the American people and being committed to the goal of sending Americans to the moon. President Kennedy said that in such an inspiring way. Those same principles of what he spoke about are embodied in successive NASA authorizations act, our authorizations acts over the last several years. And what I believe is so important is that we work to achieve those goals set forth by Congress in those acts by returning Americans to deep space exploration. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Clarke. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. Before introducing the witnesses, the Chair wishes to express his thanks to Mr. Lacefield and Mr. Chilton for agreeing to appear before this committee on relatively very short notice. While we normally require witnesses to provide testimony 48 hours in advance of a hearing, under the current circumstances, it would be inappropriate to hold them to the same standard, and we're pleased they're able to join us here this morning. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel of witnesses, and then we will proceed to hear from each of them in order. Our first witness is Mr. Dan Dumbacher, the Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development at NASA. Mr. Dumbacher joined NASA in 1979 at the Marshall Space Flight Center. He's held a number of management positions during his career, including most recently heading the Engineering Directorate at Marshall. Mr. Dumbacher has also served as Deputy Director of the Exploration Launch Projects Office, Deputy Director of the Ares Projects Office, and Deputy Director of the Safety and Mission Assurance Office. He's received a number of awards and honors during his career with NASA. Mr. Dumbacher graduated from Purdue University with a degree in mechanical engineering. Our second witness is Mr. Cleon Lacefield, Vice President and Orion Program Manager at Lockheed Martin Corporation. He has more than 34 years of aerospace experience, beginning in the Navy as an A-7 pilot, then moving over to NASA, where he participated in a number of spaceflight programs, including as Flight Director at Mission Control in Houston and as Director in the X-33 program. Mr. Lacefield earned a number of awards and honors during his tenure at NASA and is a graduate of California Polytechnic State University. Our third witness is Mr. Jim Chilton, Vice President and Program Manager for Exploration Launch Systems at Boeing. Previously, Mr. Chilton served as Program Manager for the Checkout, Assembly, and Payload Processing Services contract at Boeing's Kennedy Space Center facility. Mr. Chilton joined Boeing at the Rocketdyne Division as an engineer, serving a number of roles in engine test and launch operations. Mr. Chilton holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Washington State University and a master's degree in space technology from the Florida Institute of Technology. Our final witness is Dr. Matt Mountain, Director of the Space Telescope Science Institute. Dr. Mountain has been Director of the Institute since September 2005. He leads the 400-person organization responsible for the science operations of the Hubble Space Telescope. He is the James Webb Space Telescope's telescope scientist, a member of the JWST Science Working Group, a professor at the Johns Hopkins University's Department of Physics and Astronomy, and a visiting professor at the University of Oxford. Dr. Mountain is a fellow of the American Astronomical Society and the Royal Astronomical Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Thanks again to our panel for being here this morning. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each. After all witnesses have spoken, members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask a question. I now recognize our first witness, Mr. Dumbacher, to present his testimony.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to update you on NASA's Exploration Systems development programs, which are depicted on the posters to my left. The Orion multipurpose crew vehicle, the Space Launch System, and the related ground systems, and you can see there evidence of some of our progress. Today marks the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's speech at Rice University, in which he discussed America's space efforts and particularly the coming missions to the moon. As the nation celebrates the achievements of Neil Armstrong and the realization of President Kennedy's goal, I am pleased to inform you that we are making excellent progress towards developing the next generation capabilities for human space exploration beyond low Earth orbit. Orion is a 4-person spacecraft designed to support exploration missions to multiple destinations. We have pressed forward with the design and manufacture of the first flight test article, and the first flight test crew module structure is at Kennedy Space Center for assembly and integration. In addition, the program has completed significant acoustic and vibration testing, water impact tests, and parachute tests. Fabrication of the heat shield has been initiated, and the testing of avionics and software systems continues. Orion will be used in the uncrewed exploration flight test in 2014. This will be a 2-orbit, high-energy reentry test mission that will obtain critical performance data needed to confirm the design of the spacecraft. Exploration Flight Test 1 will also serve as a pathfinder to validate innovative approaches, reduce cost, demonstrate recovery procedures, and develop the launch vehicle adapter. This adapter will also be used on the uncrewed flight in 2017 and the first crewed flights beginning in 2021. The Space Launch System is a heavy lift launch vehicle that will transport Orion as well as cargo and other systems with a range of lift capabilities from 70 metric tons, evolving up to 130 metric tons. The Space Launch System team completed the required acquisition strategy process and had all contractors working by December 31st, 2011. The team has completed key reviews and over the next year is proceeding to preliminary design review for the booster and core stage elements as well as the integrated Block 1 vehicle. The Space Launch System core stage team has successfully completed its systems definition review. 15 RS-25D liquid hydrogen engines have been delivered to the Stennis Space Center in preparation for installation and test on the core stage. NASA has initiated efforts to prepare the B-2 test stand at Stennis for the core stage testing. Solid booster segments are being prepared for the qualification motor tests, with the first such test slated for next May. In July, NASA selected 6 proposals under an open, competitive NASA research announcement to improve the booster's affordability, reliability, and performance. These initial risk reduction tasks will be followed by another full and open competition for the full-scale design and development work leading to an advanced booster for the Evolved Space Launch System. The 130 metric ton Block 2 Space Launch System configuration will require a new upper stage utilizing the J2X engines currently in development testing. J2X has completed a total of over 3,250 seconds in 29 tests on the engine and power pack. In the exploration ground systems effort, the Kennedy Space Center team has made significant progress on the necessary infrastructure design, development, and refurbishment to support the Space Launch System and Orion. Kennedy Space Center is proceeding also through its key reviews. The center has completed the first phase of mobile launcher construction. Refurbishment and upgrades to the crawler transporter are being performed at a pace to support the 2017 flight test. In addition, work is beginning on the vehicle assembly building to support the Space Launch System. Pad 39B has been prepared for the mobile launcher, with lightning towers in place and the needed refurbishment to pad infrastructure. As we move forward, NASA is working to keep all of these efforts integrated and coordinated. We successfully completed an integrated systems requirements review in February of 2012 for all of the integrated systems and are progressing toward our integrated systems definition review early next year. The agency is working with an affordable model using a smaller number of Level 1 requirements, similar to what we did during the Apollo program. We have also streamlined the decision and integration processes to assure timely decision making while addressing the needed technical aspects. The NASA industry team has made great progress over the past year. Orion and the Space Launch System fit well within a broader U.S. launch strategy of procuring commercial launches for crew and cargo to the International Space Station, while concentrating NASA's development efforts on exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit, including flights to asteroids. Both Orion and Space Launch System are being designed to support multiple missions and destinations rather than being optimized for one particular mission or architecture. Ultimately, these capabilities will pave the way for the human missions to Mars. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide you with our progress and status over the past year. I would be happy to respond to any questions you or the other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Lacefield for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman Palazzo, Chairman Hall, Mr. Clarke, Congressman Clarke, and members of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. It is a pleasure for me to testify before you today concerning the Orion spacecraft and its contribution to the future of America's human space exploration program. As you are well aware, Orion is the world's first interplanetary spacecraft supporting safe, long-duration human exploration and scientific discovery missions to deep space, including the Moon, asteroids, the moons of Mars, and ultimately Mars itself. Orion is complementary to, and indeed has contributed to, the development of technologies for many of NASA's programs. NASA Lockheed Martin Orion team is comprised of Lockheed Martin, Aerojet, ATK, Hamilton Sundstrand, Honeywell, and USA, and many business suppliers in 41 states. It is an exceptional team that includes some of the most highly motivated engineers in industry. On the government side, it is led by NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston and involves a number of other NASA centers across the country. The Orion team continues to make tremendous progress developing, manufacturing, assembling, and testing the state-of-the-art space exploration vehicle. We are currently advancing toward our next major milestone, Exploration Flight Test 1, or EFT-1, in 2014, leading to follow-on orbital flight testing of Exploration Mission 1, EM-1, and subsequent crewed flight far beyond low Earth orbit in deep space, Exploration Mission 2, or EM-2. EM-1 and EM-2 will fly on the Space Launch System managed by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Program in Huntsville, Alabama. The following are examples of major program technical progress and our commitment to crew safety and system reliability. We have successfully tested a new launch abort system during Pad Abort Test 1 at White Sands Missile Test Range in New Mexico to demonstrate our capability to protect the crew under emergency conditions. In collaboration with NASA and our Colorado-based Ball Aerospace teammate, we developed an innovative navigation and docking system called STORM, which was successfully tested during Space Shuttle mission STS-134. We have completed parachute tests at the Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona, and we are continuing water landing tests at the Hydro Basin facility at NASA's Langley Research Center in Virginia. And we are building propulsion system components at Lockheed Martin's facility located at NASA's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. We have successfully completed spaceflight acoustic and vibration testing on the Orion ground test article spacecraft at Lockheed Martin's facility in Colorado, and we delivered the EFT-1 Orion crew module to the Operations and Checkout Facility, America's spacecraft factory for the future at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, with work moving forward on critical system installation, assembly, and test. The NASA Lockheed Martin team has also initiated major affordability measures and streamlined Orion program management oversight by incorporating proven commercial practices. That said, it remains critically important that Congress maintain fiscal 2013 funding at the current level to ensure timely and successful implementation of EFT-1 in 2014, as well as out-year budgets to support EM-1 and EM-2. In fact, Orion's considerable progress and the importance of our continued commitment to crew safety, reliability, and risk mitigation testing was emphasized by the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, ASAP, in its most recent review of the Orion and SLS programs. Mr. Chairman, with your leadership and continued bipartisan support of this committee, Congress, and the President, Orion, together with SLS, has prepared for unprecedented missions of exploration and discovery, taking humans further into the solar system than ever before experienced, while encouraging STEM education among our youth and providing high-tech careers and jobs. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize our third witness, Mr. Chilton, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Palazzo, Chairman Hall, Ranking Member Clarke, Congressman Brooks. On behalf of Boeing, thanks for the opportunity to be here. We want to thank you for your continued support of human spaceflight. You enabled the safe flight out of the shuttle, completion of ISS, and outlining this path for beyond Earth orbit exploration. Without your committee, this wouldn't have happened, so thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. As previously stated, the Space Launch System is an enabler for human deep space exploration needed to propel elements free of Earth's gravity. It can serve as a backbone of our nation's space program in any post-ISS era. I'd like to start by talking about challenges per your request. It's worth noting up front that many potential challenges on SLS have already been avoided. NASA quite wisely selected an architecture that allows reuse of designs and elements that have been very successful on other programs. This separation of product development and technology development increases our overall confidence in schedule, cost, and mission success. That said, accomplishing rapid development of the core stage of Block 1 of the SLS is foremost among the remaining challenges. The SLS engines and boosters are heritage space shuttle elements. The SLS Block 1 upper stage is directly adapted from our Delta IV heavy launch vehicle. But the core stage, on the other hand, is a clean sheet design, meaning the existing elements are waiting for the core stage to catch up with them. To see the schedule challenge, we can compare the lead time required to produce a shuttle external tank to the time allotted for this core stage development. As shuttle neared her end, schedule estimates for calling up another ET ranged from 36 to 44 months. The time allotted from system requirements review completion that Mr. Dumbacher mentioned is about 51 to 54 months, and the core stage has got to design and certify that design in close to the same time. So it gives you a feel for the kind of challenge. A flat budget profile for SLS, which is atypical for development programs, creates another unique challenge, and it necessitates that SLS development occur through an evolutionary process. Simultaneous development of all the elements needed to get to the final configuration of the SLS won't be possible under that flat budget profile, so NASA will have to choose that so that each succeeding element developed offers the most incremental beyond Earth orbit performance for the smallest cost. As we work the cryogenic stages, we're retaining the option for that element to be a large upper stage should NASA choose it, so that the maximum economic efficiency can be gained from our core stage efforts. As far as risk reduction goes, we're reducing risk through adaptation of existing subsystems and components, even though the core stage will be new. We have to ensure SLS is a standalone exploration class rocket that can be adapted to many missions that emerge over many years. This is going to require a guidance system independent of payloads or crew systems, so it can serve multiple users in crew and cargo configuration. To ensure we could get there on time, we've chosen to produce many of the key elements in-house at Boeing. The best example of this is the overall vehicle flight computer. We've based it on a proven Boeing commercial satellite design and already have gotten to a critical design review and put test versions in the lab for NASA software. To keep SLS and the overall programs stable over the long haul, it's important to ensure SLS is protected and nurtured long enough to succeed. Preventing temporary budget variations from impacting schedules is a key part of that. Stable funding, which should include planning for funding that escalates with inflation, will allow a steady and predictable progress. Construction of facility tasks should be fully funded even under continuing resolution conditions early in the program, so we can get the factory and test facilities up and active. We also will work hard with NASA to get defined contracts in place that allow thorough interrogation of cost and schedule for the long haul and integrated baseline reviews. Our progress has been really strong. We started in December, as Mr. Dumbacher mentioned. We've already passed through a system requirements review and system definitions review 2 months ahead of our contract milestones. Our first hardware deliveries are already behind us in the avionics area, and design tempo is increasing daily. On the manufacturing side, we're past 50% on all the major tools. We begin installation of the big tooling at Michoud late this year and finish late next, so we'll have an active factory by early 14. Our manufacturing developments are influenced in design very positively. Early test welds indicate we're going to get to 4 weld thicknesses and about 14 unique schedules, compared to 14 thicknesses and about 75 schedules on an external tank. That and less costly materials are going to make it much more affordable for the government. We plan for progress upcoming. We get to a preliminary design late this year or early next. Critical design mid-14, and we plan first flight in 2017. To close, NASA's unrelenting focus on mission success has always driven us, and it still is in the way we're designing the SLS today on our pace. Thank you for the chance to testify today.
Thank you. I now recognize our final witness, Dr. Mountain, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, Chairman Hall, let me first thank you for your continuing support of space science, an endeavor where the U.S. leads the world. In response to your questions about the role large space launch vehicles like NASA's Space Launch System could play in space science, let me provide some context. The partnership between NASA's science and human spaceflight programs has led to globally recognized icons of science, such as the Hubble Space Telescope. A large launch system such as SLS provides another opportunity that could allow us to observe amazing phenomena that are well beyond the capabilities of the Hubble, the James Webb Space Telescope, or our existing fleet of interplanetary spacecraft. Imagine being able to answer the question that stirs endless wonder across the millennia: are we alone? That answer is now within reach. Imagine returning samples of Martian soil back to Earth in a single mission for analysis. Imagine landing a new generation of probes on far more distant bodies, such as icy moons of Jupiter, to drill through the ice of Europa and see if life may have existed or even continues to exist there. Our imagination can become reality if NASA and the science community can find cost-effective ways to use the Space Launch System. Let me give some examples. The SLS has the potential to completely change the paradigm for building future space telescopes that simply would not be possible today. To search for the evidence of biological activity, life on hundreds of potentially habitable worlds that exist beyond our solar system would require a telescope that has a primary mirror that is 15 to 25 meters across. That's 3 to 4 times larger than the James Webb Space Telescope. The SLS would allow us to efficiently bring greatly simplified building blocks of such a telescope to low Earth orbit, where they could be assembled and moved to a more distant orbit. By both having the transport capacity and by providing the human or robotic infrastructure to assemble such a system in space, the SLS is the key tool needed to answer the question, are we alone? Another example is the recent Planetary Decadal Survey's top priority, Mars sample return. To make this complex mission feasible with existing launch technologies, it had to be carried out over 3 separate launches, significantly stretching out this mission's duration and potential cost. The current SLS has the capability to combine all 3 into a single launch. So what are the characteristics of an SLS that enable such an exciting scientific future for the U.S. space program? First, the 70 to 130 metric ton lift capacity to low Earth orbit means that more conventional materials and components could be used in spacecraft and observatory design. Ultra-lightweight components could be replaced with heavier, more rigid structures, and perhaps more high-cost specialized components could be replaced with more commercial-like systems. This simplifies the design, consequently reduces mission risk and hopefully cost. Secondly, the SLS must be able to launch not just more mass, but the payload fairing must be able to accommodate large volumes, so we can simplify telescopes and large missions by reducing all or many of the on-orbit deployments that could otherwise be needed if one only had access to smaller launch vehicles. Third, for some science missions, the ability of an SLS system to also bring up sophisticated robots or astronauts to assemble or service future complex science missions is a really exciting opportunity. Fourth, the solar system missions, the increased energy of SLS launch vehicle also means planetary science payloads can be launched over a wider range of launch windows, and in some cases being able to travel directly to solar system bodies, saving transit time. Finally, but crucially, science can only realistically use Space Launch System if its availability for research missions is both reasonably frequent, probably at least once a year, and not excessively costly to the science mission providing that payload. There is a multi-decade precedent for this, the partnership between human spaceflight and science that has enabled 22 years of unparalleled discoveries with the Hubble Space Telescope. The cost of the space shuttle for the Hubble was not fully borne by NASA's Space Mission Director, but rather provided as part of NASA's spaceflight infrastructure for use by the entire agency. Science should be considered an essential and exciting partner in the exploration endeavor, but science cannot drive the development of a human spaceflight system. In closing, the SLS can definitely enable several very ambitious and imaginative science missions that only NASA and this nation can do. The results would be truly inspirational. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for your support and that of the subcommittee. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions.
I thank the panel for their testimony, reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Both SLS and Orion programs are operating under a flat funding profile through the first uncrewed flight in December 2017. How will NASA address any developmental challenges that cannot be managed within the constraints of the current budget? Mr. Dumbacher.
We are working hard within that flatline budget to phase the content. Our plan is set up to deliver on 2017 and 2021 as it has been submitted. The process that we have to go through, number one, is to make sure that the integrated system stays together in terms of SLS, Orion, and ground systems all arriving at the needed delivery dates with the needed technical capabilities on time, and we work hard to do that. How we do this is, one, we purposely chose a system that had minimal development risk. Our major, in the past, with launch vehicle development, propulsion systems are typically the high-risk items. By utilizing the RS-25s, shuttle main engines from the shuttle program, as well as boosters with shuttle heritage and constellation development behind them, we have minimized a lot of that risk. And then we have to phase in the content, the program content, to support 2017 to be able to handle the natural development curve for things, for elements such as the core stage. And we have been very deliberate, very detailed in our planning to put that plan together, to phase the content so that we arrive with the integrated system at 2017 and 2021.
Mr. Lacefield or Mr. Chilton, if you'd like to comment.
Yes, I would like to add that we are very well synchronized with the Space Launch System, and Jim and I have a lot of contact, and we're staying closely integrated between Orion and SLS. What that allows us to do is we have put together a plan working with NASA and industry that we feel is a high confidence plan working towards 2017. We have worked multiple options with NASA, looking at things that we could defer or things that we could pull forward depending on the activities on the program or the needs of the program, and I think that allows us a great flexibility to accomplish what Dan is talking about.
Although potential missions have been discussed, NASA is currently designing SLS and Orion to be flexible with regard to multiple missions and/or destinations. When does NASA expect to determine these missions and destinations? What is the impact of designing a vehicle with multiple capabilities, some of which would not be used depending on the destination? Mr. Dumbacher.
First of all, as you have seen in the agency's delivered exploration goals and destinations report from a week or so ago, we are looking at multiple destinations. We are in the process of doing the mission analysis at this time. We know that the ultimate destination is Mars. There are the intermediate destinations between where we are today and Mars, and the exact timing of those are being sorted out through our mission analysis, and we are looking at options such as the asteroids, lunar space, lunar orbit, Lagrangian points, etc. on the way. That mission analysis is in work, and also starting to understand what the implications can be to Orion and SLS. The process we are working very hard to do is get the fundamental capabilities, that is the heavy lift launch vehicle and the spacecraft, in place. We need those for any destination we go to, and then as we sort out the mission planning, add the additional elements in that we need to execute the given missions at a given time. And of course, the timing of all that is based on the mission analysis and the available funding.
Mr. Lacefield, do you anticipate each production Orion to be essentially the same basic design with components and systems to be inserted based on mission requirements?
We are certainly set up that way. We have a very capable vehicle that we can actually add mission kits to for whatever the destination is. We've done a lot of mission work with NASA, and Boeing has been with us as we've been supporting NASA in their mission development to make sure that the capability that we have or the mission kits that we have are easily attainable and easy for us to reconfigure flight to flight if so needed. Right now, the way that we are looking at the architecture is most everything that we need will be built into the first vehicle that we fly, EM1, such that there is little update, if any update, for EM2, such that we have the capability as soon as possible to get as much flight test time as we can on the vehicles before we put humans in the vehicles.
Same basic question for Mr. Chilton on the Boeing's SLS design.
Yes, for all our cryogenic stages and especially core stage, we contemplate the same production configuration for economic advantage. And mods we would anticipate would only be driven by missions that are much further out than the early configs, and anything for obsolescence. All of that we see as next decade or beyond. So for your question about schedule, to hold schedule and to make sure we get into a single configuration for economic advantage, we plan to fly the same stages every time.
Thank you. Mr. Lacefield, your hearing statement makes reference to work being done on Orion at Stennis. Could you please elaborate on the nature of the Orion work being done there?
Certainly. We are utilizing our Lockheed Martin space satellite factory there to manufacture all of the propulsion components needed for Orion. So we're doing all of the tubes, valves, regulators, and actually a lot of the insulation blankets are all done at Stennis and then shipped to Florida for assembly into the vehicle. It is a facility that in Lockheed Martin is known for its ability to put high-pressure systems together and weld them and have high reliability, and we're using that factory for Orion.
Well, thank you. I now recognize Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also have concerns about adequate funding for both of these important projects. I'm also from the city of Detroit, metropolitan Detroit, and we're also concerned about creating more jobs. But we'll deal with the economic benefits of these projects later on. Mr. Dumbacher, under a continuing resolution for FY 2013, what level of funding and what spend rate will SLS and Orion get?
Under the current understanding of what the 6-month continuing resolution will contain, we are planning to 50% of the fiscal year 12 appropriations levels. And that will be the spend rate that we are working to on SLS and Orion for the first 6 months. We do have to recognize, however, that the uncertainty in the budget and the uncertainty in the potential budget appropriations for the remainder of the fiscal year also need to be included in our planning, and we are working to address that. But in the near term, we are planning for the next 6 months to plan at 50% of the fiscal year 12 appropriations level.
Now, have you been giving any guidance regarding the CR?
What I just talked about, the FY 12 50% level is the guidance I have been given.
All right, fine. Even though we've made considerable progress in the development of both of these projects, we still have critical milestones ahead. As Congress and the administration are weighing our funding priorities, how important is the need for funding and spending stability over this next year, and what's the impact of not getting it? And I know many of you have actually alluded to this, but Mr. Dumbacher, I'd like to know your opinion.
Funding stability of any endeavor of this magnitude, launch vehicles, spacecraft, is critical to the program planning and program success. The ability to plan into the future and to understand what the future holds within some reasonable level of understanding allows us to set up our program plans to address that, and then allows us to go execute. Changes to or instability in the funding forces replan work, rework, all of that effort takes away from our ability to actually execute and get the hardware developed and build the program.
Thanks, Mr. Dumbacher. Mr. Lacefield or Mr. Chilton, you care to comment on the impact of not getting the funding that we need?
NASA has been very good at telling us what the levels are to assume, and we have planned the program to those levels. But I would like to emphasize that, with our workforce, and our workforce is our most important asset, and maintaining those critical skills across the program, we believe is really important. The funding stability is extremely important to us because that's the way that we have to look at the program as we go through the different phases, and we go from a engineering phase to a development phase to a test phase. It allows us to bring those people across those interfaces so they're available for the EM1 and EM2 missions. So having that stability allows us to keep that professional workforce, which is vital, to these high-performance programs.
Thank you.
I'd like to add that there's a bit of an unseen element in addition to cost, schedule, and skills. We've had great luck attracting talent fresh out of college. A lot of young people have joined these programs. They see it as a very attractive place to go. I have experience on other programs where we started and didn't finish and had to stop. We don't get those young people back. They begin to see this industry as unattractive or unstable. They have a strong desire to start something and finish it, take something to flight. So I would argue our STEM attraction, it's important to keep stable and make progress.
Mr. Chilton, I mean, that's an interesting, dimension to this funding issue. How important is it to actually get, our young college graduates into the space programs?
In my view,
do you have enough people right now in place in NASA to be able to, and with your company and other contractors?
I'll speak for Boeing. The Space Launch System currently is a great attractor of students out of college, and a high proportion of our program is composed of them. If you just look at a talent pipeline over a couple of decades, you have to fill the entry level and you have to put them on hard programs, or you don't have the ability to do tough stuff with senior people later. So I'd argue keeping this stable and continuing to attract those young people is important for all of us.
And probably these programs too. I mean, it's a great incentive to encourage our college students to actually go into science and to get their advanced degrees to be able to do the work that's needed here to advance SLS and Orion. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Lacefield.
Just as Mr. Chilton talked about Boeing, a third of our team I would classify as under 30. And and most of those have come to us and they're right out of school. And these kids are highly motivated, and they have a technology level, especially when we talk about advanced computing, advanced avionics, that is really vital, I think, to not only NASA but also to the Department of Defense. So we see a lot of these technologies that these kids are involved with as playing forward to other vital programs in the U.S.
Thank you, and I yield my time.
I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. According to our committee notes for this hearing, Orion is much further along in development than SLS because the administration's decision to cancel Constellation was more disruptive to the launch vehicle development than to Orion's. And so I imagine that there is some plus then from the billions of taxpayer dollars that were spent on Constellation, and that we at least have something to show for it, the progress that was made on the Orion capsule. On the other hand, though, we have much less to show for the billions of dollars that were spent on the Constellation launch platform. That having been said, Mr. Dumbacher, what assurances can you give America that this White House, this administration, won't unilaterally undermine or cancel the Space Launch System, as it pretty much did with Constellation, at a cost to taxpayers of, again, some billions of dollars?
Well, Congressman, I think the fiscal year budget request that from the President demonstrates the stable funding and the intention to continue on and the desire to make SLS and Orion productive. I think that President's budget request is the plan that we have developed. It's what we are working to, and that the support is there to go make that happen. I will also add that we are taking more advantage than just Orion from the Constellation program, particularly in our solid rocket boosters that we are using on the first two flights. The 5-segment boosters do have shuttle heritage, but they are coming out of the Ares development, and that development made great strides, and we're taking advantage of that as part of the Space Launch System to move that forward, and that's an element of our success with the development motor that we completed a firing on that a year ago, and next May we will be doing our first qualification motor firing.
Well, the assurances that you've given me sound a lot like the assurances that were given to the Constellation program prior to its cancellation. Is there anything else that you can add that would make us in Congress or the American people feel more comfortable that we will not continue along this path spending billions of taxpayers' of dollars on the development of the Space Launch System only to have, once again, the White House pull the rug out from underneath us?
I think, Mr. Congressman, as I've mentioned, the President's budget request demonstrates that commitment to continue on. The team that we have across the country at the various NASA centers, our industry partners, as well as the leadership of the agency has demonstrated its commitment, and we are continuing to move forward with all due haste in order to meet our 2017 flight date, and that's our target.
Thank you. Mr. Lacefield and Mr. Chilton, how have continuing resolutions as a funding mechanism for NASA impacted the private sector's ability to do what needs to be done to advance Orion and the Space Launch System? Has there been any adverse effect at all? Is it something that the private sector is comfortable with? As you know, we're about to face another continuing resolution for some number of months into this fiscal year. Can you help educate me on whether there is any impact on the private sector by continuing resolutions, and if so, please describe it.
Mr. Congressman, I'll try to give our viewpoint on that. Continuing resolutions are an impact, but this is one where over the last several years NASA has been very good at telling us what to plan to or what to anticipate the plan to. So we have really done a lot of planning to make sure that we can meet those numbers, and we have worked options so that if we have contingencies that arrive, that we can work around those. They are hard constraints when you're working a development program, because at this point in a development program, of course, there's a lot of hardware in the loop that you're trying to make sure that you can purchase and develop and test, but that's part of the planning that we've gone through. I think what we've seen with the stress in the system has really allowed the team to go at this from a different point of view, from an affordability point of view. I know there's a lot of there's been a lot of discussion about the government programs versus the commercial programs. We have brought in a great deal.
Mr. Lacefield, if you don't mind, I'm going to interject. My question was limited just to the impact of continuing resolutions.
Okay.
Are you saying there is no harm or there is harm?
It is very difficult, but it is something that we plan around.
All right, Mr. Chilton, please.
In general, we'd always rather be executing our programs than replanning them. Any continuing resolution can push you into a replan situation. Mr. Dumbacher testified that NASA has protected us from that for the first 6 months of government fiscal 13 by planning for 50% of 12.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Johnson from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to place my opening statement in the record and simply apologize for having two conflicting, very important committee hearings. My question is to Mr. Lacefield and Mr. Chilton. NASA has set a schedule of 2014 and 2017 for unmanned test flights, with 2021 as the first manned test flights of the integrated Orion and SLS system. What out-year funding levels will be required to achieve this schedule? And given the current funding constraints, what parts of the test plan are most at risk, and what are the implications? What would be the implications of any funding reductions?
I think from the Orion point of view, we have planned the program through the scope to accomplish the 2014 mission and the 2017 missions at the marks that NASA has received, so that we see those as high confidence level tests that we can get to. I think the thing that we worry about the most is trying to do the human space flight earlier than the 2021, and that's where we've probably spent the most time looking at options to bring that forward. But at the current time, you know, we are not able to bring that forward with the funding marks that we have today.
From a test perspective, it's very important that we get our government facilities ready to run tests. That includes the test stands at the Stennis Space Center. The core stage of the SLS, the first flight stage, will actually go to Stennis and undergo what we call a proto-flight test. We'll put her in the stand, learn about the tanking, run instrumentation, and firing sequences that get us ready to fly. If we have budget disruptions that make it so those government facilities aren't ready, going back to Congressman Brooks' question, if under a CR our colleagues at the agency can't have those ready, that'll certainly be a schedule challenge, if not a slip. So that funding is important. And I would also agree with Mr. Lacefield. We think our production systems and our supply chains and our people will be ready to produce the Space Launch System and Orion's more than 1 in 17 and more than 21, and we'll just let funding dictate whether we get to do that or not.
Thank you. Mr. Dumbacher, would you care to comment?
I think our available funding is the 2014, 2017, and 2021 dates are all within our available funding and the plan that we have. We are working to mitigate the risks associated with that, but we believe we can execute the plan to those dates. The testing is very important. 2014, the exploration flight test is critical for our Orion flight test, particularly because it addresses 12 of our 16 top risks for that spacecraft, as well as an opportunity to test out our recovery systems for recovering the crew module from the ocean once we land. And it's also critical from an SLS perspective in that we get the payload to launch vehicle adapter designed, developed, and built, and we'll use that same adapter for the 2017 and 2021 flights. So our integrated test plan is very important. We have laid it out very carefully to make sure we address our high-risk items and to work that within the budget, and we believe we have the answer and the plan that we need to execute.
Thank you. Thank you. My time's about to expire.
I now recognize Mr. Rohrabacher from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to figure out exactly how much money we're talking about here, and we keep getting answers dealing with the percentage of this and the percentage of that. What exactly is the budget amount that you're seeking to have appropriated for fiscal year 13 for Orion SLS?
The President's budget request, as I recall, and we can take it for the record to go back and get the exact numbers, but we're in the ballpark of about $1 billion annually for Orion and $1.3 billion for SLS per the President's budget request. Now, we can go back and get the exact numbers, but that's working off the top of my head, Congressman.
All right. To be fair about it, I would think that someone would know exactly how much money they're requesting when they come to a hearing to talk about those projects. So roughly $2.5 billion is what we're talking about for Orion SLS. Did we just hear that there's going to be no tests with people on Orion until 2021?
Our first crewed flight is 2021, and that plan is based on the available funding level that we have today.
And that $2.3 billion that we're doing today, that you expect that level of spending to continue or to go up according to your plan?
Our plan is laid out with the President's budget request is laid out with constant year funding across the budget horizon, and that's what our plan has been included, has been built upon. And one item I would like to identify is that in addition to the SLS and Orion funding is also the funding that is necessary for the ground systems program at KSC in order to have the launch infrastructure ready to support both Orion and SLS.
Is that included in the $2.3 billion figure you just?
No, that's an additional 400 million plus.
So now we're talking more like
We're close. We're talking
2.7 billion about.
in that, yes, and we'll take it for the record to go back and get the precise
Right.
numbers.
That's a lot of money. We would hope that that when we're dealing with these big projects, we're dealing with big money, and if something goes wrong, we end up losing big money, and we've seen a lot of examples of that in the past. Let me just, I'm wondering if there's other ways to go about this. Let me ask, is it Mr. Lacefield? Is that how I pronounce his name? Now, the SLS is not scheduled to be ready, but Orion will be ready before. Is that correct?
What we have done is we have a test flight or a flight test of Orion early to prove that we can.
And that's going to go up on a Delta IV.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What is the cost of a Delta IV flight?
It's in the ballpark of $300 million.
Okay, and a test flight, and when we get the SLS done, what will be the cost of that flight? Like flight on the SLS, beside all of the expenses of developing this $35 billion development cost? Who can answer that?
Well, I'll take that one, Mr. Congressman. We're still working that number up. It will be higher number than the Delta IV heavy cost that Mr. Lacefield mentioned.
It's going to be higher, and then we have all the development costs. And this. What can we do? Are there other missions that we can do with the Orion on top of a Delta IV? Mr. Lacefield?
When we look at the exploration missions, and we start looking at the nearest mission that we're talking about doing is in the cislunar or the lunar environment. It takes the SLS for us to do that mission. So EM1 and EM2, which will fly, to 300,000 miles out there, it takes an SLS to boost us there.
So Delta IVs would not permit the Orion capsule from doing these lunar missions. Are there other missions that Orion might be able to do on Delta IVs?
May I address it? We seem to be talking about a big rocket versus a small rocket.
A smaller,
A meaningful beyond Earth orbit exploration requires a heavy lift rocket. It's been studied by the agency, many other, most recently and famously by the Augustine Commission. Mm-hmm. And both Augustine panels said a heavy lift rocket is required to do beyond Earth orbit exploration. He confirmed that again, in fact, in an interview with Space News in April.
Right, beyond Earth orbit for manned flight.
Yeah, yes.
We do a lot of things with the Delta IV that unmanned.
So the driver is the size for human rated elements and the velocity to escape Earth's gravity.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to be watching, and we wish you luck. We want you to succeed, and we've just been through a number of these in the past where we end up we got budget problems on this end, and then we end up losing billions of dollars. So I hope that you are successful, and we're on your side. Thank you very much.
We're going to be going into a second round of questioning, and I'll lead it off for 5 minutes. Dr. Mountain, what is more important to the people designing trajectories for science missions, an emphasis on the amount of mass that can be carried to low Earth orbit, or an emphasis on the amount of mass that can be delivered to escape velocity for beyond Earth orbit? Is the SLS being designed to optimize beyond Earth orbit missions?
It depends entirely on the science you want to do. There are several methods. If you're trying to get to interplanetary science, you care about going out of the Earth's gravity well and getting into into interplanetary space. And that's where you need the acceleration and the energy to take these missions out. When you're looking at building very large telescopes, the kind of telescopes that could perhaps detect life, what you care about there is volume and mass to get something out of the Earth's atmosphere and into orbit, where you could either assemble it or have a big enough telescope that you could then send out to a Lagrange point too. And so it really depends on the science. Where we are right now are limited in both those areas by our current launch technologies. We don't really have the energy or the acceleration to go directly to places like Europa, and we don't have the volume or the lift capacity to launch bigger telescopes than the James Webb Space Telescope.
Your statement noted that even if the SLS was primarily a vehicle for human exploration, as long as it was available for the science missions and wasn't excessively costly for the science mission providing the payload, that it could serve to unify and integrate NASA to be greater than the sum of its parts. The synergy between the shuttle and the Hubble Space Telescope are a good example. With the retirement of the shuttle, in your view, has NASA lost some of this synergy between human spaceflight and the science community?
Certainly when you come to look at missions like the Hubble Space Telescope, there is no way back to the Hubble, for example, or no way back to contemplate missions like a future Hubble or a future large telescope. We've gone down another path where we're going to send out specialized missions that can't be serviced or upgraded or repaired. And one has to examine the model, whether that is a smart model for future, even more ambitious missions. I think the power of being able to actually reconnect the human spaceflight program and science is demonstrated by the tremendous success of the Hubble, or our ability to test things initially on the space station that would then allow us to try new technologies into deeper space. I think there's a huge opportunity to actually connect some of the technologies in the human spaceflight with the ambitions of the science program. And the development of new technologies always goes hand in hand with exploration and science.
Thank you. Mr. Lacefield, what is the significance of the friction stir welding technique that you referenced in your statement with respect to the manufacturing of the Orion crew module? And what role was played by the team at Michoud Assembly Facility in the application of that technique?
Well, the welding teams that both Boeing and Lockheed Martin have are located at the Michoud facility. It is state-of-the-art. It allows us to not have joints on the vehicle. It is a huge mass savings for Orion, and I think it's a huge mass savings for Boeing also on SLS. It is something that does play forward into other programs, into other industries, and it is a significant accomplishment, I think, for the program. We were able to build the first article without any problems that we had to go back and grind out in the welds. I mean, they just came out pristine. So it's one of the best welding processes that we've seen for spacecraft.
I would add it's significant from a safety perspective. You have very few defects with a friction stir weld because there's no heat, and that makes us economically more efficient. You can get and more schedule certain. But also the type of flaw you could get is going to be an order of magnitude bigger than the standard industrial detection capability. So we're not going to have much chance of ever having a problem we don't find. So I believe it's a safer method as well.
Mr. Dumbacher, in response to a previous question, you said that NASA was planning to the President's request. Could you elaborate? Was your response in the context of SLS and Orion, or is NASA using the budget request as guidance for all programs, projects, and activities?
Well, I can only speak to the exploration systems development area, which is SLS, Orion, and the ground systems, and we are planning to the President's budget request as it has been submitted. So that we are, I would like to emphasize that one of the advantages we have going for us is that the development risk associated with the configurations we have chosen, we purposely chose the configuration as well as set dates for the flights were set up consistent with that president's budget request, and that's what you have before you.
And does that include commercial crew planning?
No, the commercial crew is outside of my jurisdiction. That's a separate office within the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate, and that's outside of the SLS and Orion budgets.
I now recognize Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions about different aspects of these projects, but just to go back to the progress that all of you have indicated that we've made on the architecture of both Orion and SLS in the last year. In spite of that progress, what are the key challenges in maintaining that progress, and what's needed to address those challenges? Any of you, in your opinion?
Go ahead.
I think the major challenges, we've talked about one earlier, which is the budget stability and being able to plan the program out from an integrated fashion in order to arrive at the 2017 and 2021 flight dates. As is usual with this kind of work, we have technical challenges ahead of us, but they have been minimized by the choices we have made in terms of the configuration for the launch vehicle. And we are also starting to see, and Mr. Lacefield and Mr. Chilton can elaborate, we are also starting to see the typical first unit kind of problems that you have as you work through hardware with the suppliers and making sure that they're able to supply the right hardware on the right dates in order to support the flight dates. Now, we have planned margin into the schedules and other things in order to be able to adjust for much of that, but that's the typical program planning, program execution challenges that we see from an integrated level. I'll leave the rest, the further details to Mr. Lacefield and Mr. Chilton.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mr. Dumbacher said. I think the one thing I would like to bring up is that I think our supply chain in the United States is very fragile. When we look at the EEE parts needed for, for avionics, all the electronic components for electronics, in the environments that we see, which is a radiation environment in deep space, those components are very hard to find in the United States right now. And just our program with Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, and Hamilton Sundstrand buying those components, we are seeing lead times that we have never seen before. So I would say that the supply chain is, the area that we really have to focus on. We really have to focus on the long lead times of these components, and the robustness of that supply chain isn't what it was, 10 years ago.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Lacefield, because that's very disturbing. So, number one, you've got long lead times because the components are hard to find. And then, secondly, you see a fragility overall in our supply chain. Can you just, am I,
So
characterizing the way, that you're?
So we have outsourced our composites because we have a great deal of lightweight composites on the vehicle. Approximately, I think 40% of the vehicle is composites. We have outsourced those composites across the country so that we would be able to meet the schedules of the 2014 flight. We have outsourced across all of the, electrical components to get the parts that we need by the time we need to do the vehicle checkout on the pad next March, the electrical checkout. And we are waiting on those parts to enable us to do the vehicle checkout on the pad in Florida. That's what we're waiting on. So when you start looking, and we have outsourced all of the mechanical components across the country also. So we are, with our program, we are using up a great deal of the capacity that is required in spacecraft, so that the lead times that we're seeing we're in line with other DoD programs, and it's just something we haven't seen here recently. And I think it's something that we should all be aware of, what's happening with the supply chain in the United States on American suppliers.
I know this is likely off topic, from the focus of our hearing, but if you have any thoughts on what we can do to actually shorten those lead times and strengthen our supply chain, because it's very disturbing and have enormous impact on other industries as well. If anyone has any other comment on that, on the supply chain and what we can do to strengthen it and shorten the lead times on those components.
Well, I think this is where, when we talked about the funding stability and the stability in high-tech programs as they exist today, supporting DoD and NASA, I think we need to see some stability there for those suppliers to make it. And because they aren't seeing that stability, they're all retrenching, with their capability and capacities.
I got you. No, that's important. I yield back my time. Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much. Just sitting here listening with 1,000 thoughts going through my mind, I am fully aware that we are facing lots of constraints, and I fully acknowledge that we have some real concerns about how we're going to be able to fund. I hope we can stay online. But I'm also aware that until we out-innovate, and we only can innovate through research, our economy is really not going to get much better. And so I'm hoping that you will keep the pressure on us. Sometimes we get a little lightheaded here. To stay on track, because when you just reflect, we are aware that where we are today basically came from this type of research. And where we're going to be tomorrow, it will come from this research. It'll either be done here in partnership or it'll be done somewhere else. If it's not done by the United States or not a major part, we'll be watching it as spectators. And so I would just simply say to keep the pressure up, keep young people intrigued so that we can continue to educate the manpower we need. We simply cannot afford to do without this research. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and statements from the members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.